Good morning. I have 9 o'clock. Before we begin our Bible study, though, there's just been a lot of people that have been texting, and they're on the sick list. The Halls are on their way to the doctor. They had a lot of kids wake up this morning running fevers and sneezing and wheezing. The Harvells not going to the doctor according to the email, but they woke up the same situation. A lot of the kids not feeling well. Got an update from Sister Abrams, her mother and sister. You probably saw that email, but they've got upcoming doctor's visits and surgery schedule. A lot of people traveling, so we need to keep everybody in their thoughts and prayers on that. And if anyone is attempting to connect to the internet using our system this morning, the router, son got here this morning, and the router's out for this building, this portion of the building, so he's going to have to work on that this afternoon. So you're going to have to do without connecting to the internet in here this morning using that system. So anything else we need to? Yes, ma'am.
My brother-in-law found out that his cancer is local, and there was radiation soon. But he's 95 years old, and I said, good, you wouldn't have to have an operation. He says, I'm too old. They said, operate on.
Okay, and you said vocal?
Colon.
Colon, okay.
Cancer.
Okay.
Angel's dad, Amy's dad, little dad, has possibly throat cancer.
Okay. Anything else? Brother Jackson, would you lead us in a prayer then before class?
Dear God, we thank you for this day and this time that you've allowed us to come together to worship you and to study your word. We ask that you be with those teaching this morning, that they might have a ready recollection of what they prepared, and that we might all have open minds and hearts to your word, and that we might glean something from this study that we can take out with us into the world and shine as lights for you. Please guide our minds during this study and the worship service after, and help us to please you in everything we do. In Jesus' name we pray.
Last week on chapter 9, we had moved forward a little bit, and I had explained why I thought that chapter 9 was the last chapter in the book of Daniel. When we get to chapter 10, we're going to be backing up a few years. It starts out, your question sheet starts out with, in what year did Daniel receive this vision? And that's in verse 1. And it says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus. Well, if it's in the 3rd year of Cyrus, if we try to put that on our timeline and keep things squared away, what year are we talking about? About 536. How do you come to that number? You are correct. How do you, or at least in my opinion, you're correct. So it was in the notes in the back of the lesson. Okay, let's see if we can go at it a little bit different way then. It was 539 when Darius the Mede came in and killed Belshazzar, and the Medo-Persians took over. Well, Cyrus is the Persian king, so they're sort of parallel together. So everything starts in 539. If you look at the first verse of chapter 11, the next chapter, it says also in the 1st year of Darius, that the Mede. So this to me puts chapter 10 after chapter 11. Now, there are some that want to go in and look at it and say, well, chapter 10, 11, and 12, they're in order. But to do that, you've either got to come in with one of two explanations. The first one is that you just have to ignore verse 1 of chapter 11, or you have to say that, well, it was written after the fact, so when Daniel is writing all of this, he's just writing it, and where he starts out in chapter 10 in the third year, he completes that story, and then he picks up on it by backing up a couple of years. I personally like to take things on a more literal basis, and I think the dates are there for a specific reason. So I would place chapter 11 before chapter 10. So, like I said, I put chapter 9 at the end of the book. Then I would go with chapter 11, then 10, and then 12. But that's just me. We'll see if it's going to make any more sense here later as we go along. But it was in the third year of Cyrus' reign, that on this particular chapter, chapter 10, when Daniel is talking, and it is about 536 BC. Now, as a reminder, I've said this more than once, but as a reminder, I'm always on the about dates. But even though we can go to secular history and know that things occurred on a specific date, I still like to give a little room one way or the other, because the calendar changes and various things like that. But we're going to say at 536 thereabouts was the third year of his reign, and that's where things kick off here. Now, look at the rest of this verse, because to me it says a lot. A thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. The thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. So whatever's about to take place here, whatever this vision is going to be, they're calling it a thing, but it's going to be understood. When we get to verse 2, the question is, how long did Daniel fast? Three whole weeks or 3 full weeks, meaning 3 sevens, 21 days worth of time that he did this. And during that time, it says he ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth, neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. So he is fasting for that period of time. Now, there's one thing I'd like for you to think about as we go along. Again, he is looking back and writing this. It's a historical writing that he's writing. So 3 full weeks. It doesn't say that he had planned to do it for 3 weeks, or that he was just doing it until something else come along. But by eating no pleasant bread, that means that he was not indulging himself. He was just basically eating vegetables, no meat, just sustenance to keep him alive. What do we do today when we are stressed? Pardon? Eat. Sometimes we do without, but me personally, I'd like to go to the donut bar if I look for the sweets. But anyway, here he was fasting as was their custom. What do you think the thing was that we're talking about? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Verse 4, in the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel. Is there another name for that river? Tigris. How do we come up with the Tigris being another name for it? Why isn't the great river the Euphrates? Because after all, the Euphrates runs through Babylon. The Tigris is east of there, into Assyria, or what was. So how do we come up with it? If you go back to Genesis chapter 2 and verse 14, somebody read that. Genesis 2 and verse 14.
And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is, which goeth toward the east of Assyria, and the fourth river is Euphrates.
So that right there tells you that that river can't be the Euphrates, because both of them are named in Genesis. And also it gives you its location in Genesis as being east of where we're talking about. So there is some speculation as to why he is at that river, the Tigris we'll call it, instead of the Euphrates. And some people, some commentators want it to be that, well, he's no longer in the king's court. He's no longer an official. He's retired, so he's moved on to someplace else. I've got a different view on it, but anybody agree with he's probably, because he's in his mid-80s by this time. Has he retired and moved on? There's a couple of reasons I think not. One is he's still involved. He's still having visions about what's going on there. That's one of them. And the second one is, what happened with Daniel just a few chapters earlier? If we go back to chapter 6. In chapter 6 and verse 1, starting, it says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give account unto themselves, and that the king should have no damage." It was only a couple of years, maybe 3 years before this, that the king had made him a president, the top dog of the presidents. So to me, it's not likely that he has retired and moved on, especially with him still doing this. So to me, the most likely is that he was off on a mission. He was off doing the job, and he just happened not to be at Babylon at this time, but he was over in another part of their territory, which was by that great river, Hiddekel. It says, "Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz." There's a couple of things in this verse. If somebody will go to Revelation chapter 15 and verse 6. Revelation 15 and verse 6. Yes, sir.
And the 7 angels who had the 7 plagues came out of the temple, clothed in linen, clean and bright, and girded round their chests with gold sandals.
The reason I want to point that out is here when Daniel lifts up his eyes, he is apparently there by the river in great thought and probably looking at the ground, and when he lifts his eyes, this is what he sees. So when he says a certain man clothed in linen, it's the same description as angels over in the book of Revelation. So we're going to find out later that it's probably an angelic being of some type. Fine gold of Uphaz. There's nothing known about Uphaz, but if you look in Job chapter 22 and 24, it mentions the gold of Ophir. Now, according to the scholars, a one-letter change in the word changes the word Uphaz to Ophir. So we're probably talking about the gold of Ophir, and that was just a mistranslation there. But anyway, as we look at this, let's pause right there and back up just a little bit.
It's mentioned in
Jeremiah also, okay.
It's
Gold from Uphaz, okay. Okay. Why do you think Daniel was mourning for 3 full weeks after he saw the thing in verse 1?
Probably upset him or he could not deal with it.
Okay. Let's go to Ezra chapter 2. Well, to start with, let's look at Ezra chapter 1 and starting with verse 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, The Lord God of heaven hath given me all kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. If we then go to chapter 2 and the first couple of verses, Now these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity of those which had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away into Babylon, and came again unto Jerusalem and Judah, every one unto his city. And now if you will stay in chapter 2 and go all the way over to verse 64, starting with verse 64. The whole congregation together was 42,303, besides their servants and their maids, of whom there were 7,337, and there were among them 200 singers, men and women singing. If you add all of those numbers up, that comes to roughly 50,000. Cyrus in 539, according to Ezra chapter 1, verse 1, was going to send the people, let the people go back. And it was under Zerubbabel that they went back, but only 50,000 went back to take care of restoring Jerusalem. If this was the thing that Daniel had, the vision that he was looking at in chapter 10 there, if you recall our study in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, that's contemporary with this particular section of Daniel, can you not see how he would be very distraught that here finally a king comes in, releases them to go back, but only 50,000 of those that had been brought in captive wanted to go back? And you have to remember that it's roughly 70 years have passed from the first captivity to now. And the first generation of those taken captive, there's only a handful of them left. Most of them that are in captivity now were born in captivity. So they had no connection with Jerusalem, as Daniel and a few others did. So if you put yourself in the position of being either very young and not having a connection with a place, or being born at a separate place, what is your encouragement then to go to another location? I have been away from Huntsville so long. I was born, raised, grew up there for, I was there in Madison County until I left to go to college. Went back for a short visit, went in the Air Force, and never made it my home again. And right now, I've got family there, cousins. I have no real desire to go back. When I first went into the Air Force, my whole intent was to, after Air Force, move back to Huntsville. When Andrew and I were in Memphis, we'd stayed in Memphis for 4 years. We had gotten very close to the people at the congregation there. We loved that area. We'd even told them when we left that after I retire, we'll be back. We settled in Millbrook, Casada. No real desire to go back anymore, to make it a home. Like to go back and visit. But as time spreads things out, people lose their zeal for some things. So for them to go back and look how many attempts they had to make to rebuild Jerusalem at this point. Zerubbabel took about 50,000 back and didn't get the job done. Ezra went back to build them up spiritually. Nehemiah had to go in to finish off the physical work. So you can, if I'm thinking this is the thing that's being talked about, and that's why I'm putting it that way. And historically, there is evidence that this is there is a direct quote in an archaeological find dealing with Ezra talking about Cyrus sending them back. There was in 1879 to 1882, there was an archaeological dig in Babylon, and a cylinder was found with Cyrus' name on it, and it actually quoted what we had quoted from Ezra chapter 2, that he had, or 1, that he had sent people back, that he was going to build the kingdom, or build Jerusalem back, the temple. Questions or comments then down through verse 5? He was old enough to know, and then not, so I think he had the knowledge, and then, like I say, he's in his mid-80s by now, and he sees it for what it is. Question number 4 says his body was like beryl. What would that look like? Beryl. It's a gemstone, semi-precious gemstone. Stones have changed throughout the years, and that's one. And another description of it is it was green like an emerald, but not quite the shine of the emerald. So, but it looked, his face was at least stood out. His face has the appearance of lightning. His body was beryl, which stood out. His face was the appearance of lightning. His eyes were as lamps of fire. His arms like the color of polished brass. And his voice like the voice of a multitude. Where have we heard that description before? Somebody go to Revelation chapter 1. If we start in Revelation 1 and verse 13, through about 15 or 16, it says, "And in the midst of 7 candlesticks, one likened to the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were as a flame of fire. His feet like unto fine brass, and they burned in a furnace, as if they burned in a furnace. And his voice as the sound of many waters." Again, this sounds like an angelic being. And this sort of takes on the appearance of Christ, doesn't it? Verse 7, "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so they fled to hide themselves." What does it mean that he was the only one to see the vision? What caused them to flee if they didn't see the vision? What about the quaking part? A great quaking fell upon them. What's that?
This is terror.
A great terror fell upon them, so they ran and hid. But what caused them to run and hide if they didn't see the vision? If you look back at the previous verse, it says, "The voice of his words like the voice of a multitude." So to me, it is quite probable that they heard this voice, this noise, and it couldn't register what it was, and it was so loud and so there's a musical term, cacophony or something like that. Anyway, they couldn't make it out, so it scared them, and they ran, which left Daniel by himself to see the great next verse. "And therefore I was left alone and saw the great vision, and there remained no strength in me." Well, I can sort of imagine how it is if he sees something that's so amazing that he just gets weak-kneed. But then it says that "for my comeliness was turned in me." What does that phrase mean, comeliness?
New American Standard says, "My natural color turned to a deathly pallor."
In other words, his countenance or his appearance changed. What happens to most people when they get scared of something? Don't they? Color, we call it draining out of your face, or they so his appearance changed into corruption, and I retain no strength. That into corruption basically just means what the whole thing there, that his appearance changed. He was now not his natural self, but it was just pale with fright, no strength left in him. That was through question number 6. Question number 7 says, "When Daniel heard the voice, what happened?" Verse 9. When Daniel heard the voice, what happened? Fell on his face. Yet I heard the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground. There is a natural tendency of people that if they know that they are getting weak-kneed, or they're getting weak, or they're about to fall, what is the natural tendency to do? You either sink down on your knees, you go to your side, you put your hands out for a bracing. What happens when you just a dead faint? You fall in any direction, right? That's when you do the face plants. Here, when he fell in a deep sleep on his face, that means that he went straight down to the ground. And then it says, verse 10, and behold, an hand touched me, which set me up on my knees and upon the palms of my hands. In chapter 8, when this had happened, he had been lifted upright. Here, he had only got to his knees and his hands. I'm sorry? He's going through a lot of stuff for an old. You're right. And it's going to get better or worse. Verse 10, and behold, that hand touched him. And in verse 11 it says, and he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved. Okay, whose hand is on him at this point? All the people with him, and we don't know who they were, but they ran and hid. So who touched him? The person that he saw, the vision he saw, the angelic being was there. And what does he mean by greatly beloved? We know he was greatly beloved by the kings and people in and around Babylon, that kingdom. But when he's greatly beloved here, who's doing the talking, and who's he talking, making reference to? God. And then he tells him to understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. So, by reading the whole verse, we understand that with him being an angelic being and him being sent, then the beloved part comes from above. Verse 12 said, then said he unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. To me, this is one of the most powerful verses in this chapter. Because what does it tell us? What was Daniel doing in his fasting period? He was praying. He was having a conversation with God. And what does this verse tell us then? From the first day, from the very first, God heard. So why did it take 21 days? Next verse explains it, but for us today, what happens when we pray for something and it doesn't happen immediately? We get discouraged, don't we? We think if we pray to God that it needs to be answered. I mean, we live in a microwave world today. Instant oats, instant popcorn, instant everything. If it don't happen right now, if I turn my computer on or pick up my phone and I don't get the image that fast, what happens? I'm getting aggravated. Any of you, some of you younger folks don't know this, but any of you remember the days of the dial-up computers? It might take you 30 minutes to find something that today you can find in less than a second. But God hears the prayers from the very first. It's up to us to have some patience, because in the end they're going to be answered by God's way. We might not even like the answer, but God's going to take care of it in His own time. And as Brother Day said, the reason for it is in the next verse. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. I'm going to pause there. How long did Daniel fast? 21 days. How long did the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstand this particular angelic being? 21 days. Who is this angelic being? Well, I give you the answer on it. Who is this prince of the kingdom of Persia? Pardon? Michael comes to his aid a little later. Apparently, it is another angelic being, because could any earthling withstand an angelic being and prevent him from doing anything? So apparently, the prince of the kingdom of Persia is another angelic being, and this is going to give us just a little bit of an insight into that other realm. But he withstood him that many days, and then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. And I remained there with the kings of Persia. One of the chief princes is Michael. So if we're dealing with angelic beings and they're called princes, and he is one of the chief princes, what does that make Michael? Some places call it archangel, but that just means that he is in an elevated position, that he's got just a little bit more weight or a little bit more authority than the others. And verse 14 says, Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days. And yet the vision is for many days, meaning that the vision that he's seeing is taking place, and it's going to take a while to take care of it. Verse 15 then, And when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground, and I became dumb. Have any of you ever had any information given to you that just sort of set you aback or caused you to be speechless? Apparently that's what's happened to Daniel here, that once everything was explained to him, once he saw things for what they were, there wasn't anything he could say. Brother Clunt, you got anything to add to this point, or not even going to fuss at me? Just leaving me out there on that limb by myself. Verse 16, And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spake, and he said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. So he wasn't happy with what he saw, which, again, is probably how long it's going to take him to get Jerusalem put back together. But when that one touched his lips, it at least gave him the strength to start talking. And then verse 17 says, For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. So this just, I guess the old saying is, it just took the wind out of his sails. Just really set him back. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me. This is probably the same one that had touched him before, and now he came back and touched him again and gave me strength back, or gave him enough strength to carry on, and said, "O man, greatly beloved." Hadn't we heard that phrase before? "Fear not, peace be unto thee. Be strong, yea, be strong." And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, "Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me." What does that phrase mean? Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. You give me enough strength that I can now tolerate and get the rest of the story. So tell me what's going on. I'm ready to listen now. Then said he, "Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth to thee, the prince of Grecia shall come. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael, your prince." Michael, your prince here, if Michael is the archangel and Michael apparently is taking care of the issues dealing with Israel, then these other two are taking care of other issues dealing with Greece and Persia. And he's gone back to fight with the prince of Persia. And after he takes care of him, then the prince of Greece comes in, and we know from previous visions that that's the order things take place, is that the Babylonian kingdom was defeated by the Medo-Persians. The Medo-Persians are then going to be defeated by the Greeks. That gets us through chapter 11. Questions, comments? Nothing? Brother Clarence, help me out here. Sounds good, eh? Well, just for your information, there's some that want this Grecian prince, the prince of Greece that comes to be Alexander the Great, which he does come in earthly form. But personally, I think from the reading, particularly the last half of the chapter, verses 13 on, that since we are dealing with an angelic being and Michael the archangel, I think this is just some insight into that heavenly realm, because we know from history, we know from looking back at the Old Testament, how angelic beings came to earth and worked with and against and took care of issues. So, like I say, I think this is just a little glimpse of some of that activity. Now, I am here to fully admit that I have no idea how that realm works, only what I see in Scripture. But I find it a fascinating topic to look at. Any other questions, comments? I think we got about a minute left. Brother Golden. Yeah, there was attempted sabotages all along the way by taking them to legal action, threatening them with the king and all like that. And it was Nehemiah, when he came on the scene, that wouldn't have anything to do with it. Just said, "I'm here to rebuild the wall. You go away." So, but it took them, what did it take them? About 40 years to get it completely done or something like that, so. Yes, sir. Anything else? Well, thank you for your attention. The next chapter, chapter 11, is a really long one. It's one of those that's in multiple parts. It's so it'll take you a while to get through all the questions and answers on that. Chapter 12 is a relatively short chapter, and 11 is one of those that might take me a little bit of extra time on. So if I don't finish 11 next week, I can do the rest of 11 and all of 12 the following week, but we will get through it before the end of the year. Thank y'all again.